In 1894, the Times of London published a prediction so alarming, so certain, and so completely wrong that it has become one of the most cited examples of catastrophic expert overconfidence in history. The prediction was this: within 50 years, London would be buried under 9 feet of horse manure. This was not a fringe view. This was not a pamphlet distributed by someone wearing a sandwich board and shouting in a park. This was the considered mathematical conclusion of respected urban planners, engineers, and public health officials. They had run the numbers. The numbers were bad. To understand how anyone arrived at this conclusion, you have to understand what Victorian London actually looked like. By the late 1800s, London was the largest, most industrialized city in the world. It had a population of around 5 million people. It had factories, department stores, newspapers, a stock exchange, a postal service, and a sewer system that was, by the standards of the time, genuinely impressive. What it did not have was a single internal combustion engine. Not one. Every single thing that moved in London moved because of horses. Deliveries, horses. Trams, horses. Taxis, horses. Buses, horses. The fire brigade, horses. The police, horses. The army, horses. Rich people getting to parties they could easily have walked to, also horses. At the peak of this era, London had approximately 50,000 horses working in the city every single day. Each of those horses produced between 15 and 35 pounds of manure per day. Do the arithmetic and you get somewhere between 750,000 and 1.75 million pounds of manure deposited on London streets every 24 hours. That is not a typo. The smell was, by all contemporary accounts, indescribable. Flies were everywhere, disease was rampant, the streets were not just dirty, they were structurally compromised by the sheer volume of organic material constantly being deposited on them. When it rained, the streets did not just get wet, they became a liquid horror that pedestrians and horses alike struggled to navigate. There were people whose entire job was crossing sweeper. They stood at busy intersections and swept a clear path through the manure so that wealthier pedestrians could cross the road without ruining their shoes. This was considered a legitimate occupation. People competed for good crossing sweeper spots. The dead horse problem was equally significant. A working horse in Victorian London had a life expectancy of about 3 years. When a horse died in the street, which happened regularly given that they were being worked into the ground, removing it was enormously difficult. A dead horse weighs somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 pounds. You cannot simply pick it up. You have to wait for it to decompose enough that you can cut it into pieces small enough to remove. This process could take days. During those days, the dead horse sat in the road. Traffic worked around it. People walked past it. It is, by any modern standard, completely unimaginable.
So the experts were not wrong to be worried. The situation was genuinely terrible. Their projection, extrapolated from existing trends, suggested that the horse population would continue to grow as the city grew, and the manure would continue to accumulate faster than it could be removed. The Great Manure Crisis of 1894 became a kind of Victorian-era shorthand for civilizational doom. The first ever International Urban Planning Conference was held in New York in 1898 to address, among other things, exactly this problem. The conference was scheduled for 10 days. It disbanded after 3 because the delegates could not think of a solution and went home. Then, almost immediately, the problem solved itself. The internal combustion engine had existed in experimental form since the 1860s, but it was not until the 1890s that it began to be practical. By 1900, cars were appearing on the streets of London and New York in meaningful numbers. By 1912, the horse population in most major cities had begun to visibly decline. By 1920, the transformation was nearly complete. The problem that had seemed insoluble, the crisis that had convened international conferences and produced detailed mathematical projections of civilizational manure-based collapse, simply evaporated.
And here is the part that should make you think. The experts were not stupid. They were not lazy. They had correctly identified a real problem. They had done the maths competently. They had extrapolated from observed trends using the best methods available to them. What they had failed to do was account for a solution they could not yet see. This is now known in some circles as the Malthusian trap, the tendency to project current trends forward indefinitely while failing to anticipate that human ingenuity, market pressure, or sheer necessity will produce a solution that changes the terms of the problem entirely. Every generation has its version of the great manure crisis, the problem that is clearly unsolvable, the trend that can only get worse, the catastrophe that the numbers say is inevitable. And almost every time something appears that the projections did not account for, and the catastrophe is quietly averted, while the next inevitable catastrophe takes its place. The horses are gone from London streets. The manure crisis never arrived. And somewhere, right now, a very serious expert is looking at a trend line and concluding that something terrible is approximately 50 years away. They might be right. They might be another crossing sweeper, standing in a street that is about to become obsolete, brushing a path that nobody will need in a decade. History has a sense of humor. It just requires a long memory to appreciate it. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.